Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Mina Rose. I'm the new project coordinator for the CWC Coalition, and I'm very happy to virtually make all of your acquaintance and to welcome you to our first webinar of the year. So today we're going to be joined by Ambassador Henk Cor Kwast, who is the chair-designate for the 5th Review Conference, which will be upcoming from May 15th to 19th of this year. And he's going to share his ideas and his thoughts about what we can expect at the review conference. Ambassador Kwast is also the permanent representative to the OPCW, and he's been dedicated to disarmament issues for many years. So we're really happy to have him here. We're also joined by Dr. Paul Walker, who's the head of the CWC Coalition. So I'm going to start by just giving the floor to Paul. I'll turn it over to him, and then we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mina. And thank you all for coming this morning. It's actually good to have everyone here. I'm really delighted that we were able to establish a discussion like this about 2 months before the 5-year review conference. Many of us I know have known Ambassador Henk Cor for a long time. I've worked with him for well over 15 and maybe even be 20 years since we worked together in the Dutch Foreign Ministry. But he's been really a very positive, very moving force behind the OPCW and the Chemical Weapons Convention. We only have 2 months before about 2 months before the convention begins in May, middle of May, as Mina said, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this date. I'm also glad that Ambassador Henk Cor has, you'll see in the video there, I think now arrived. It's good to see you, Ambassador. We had organized this to have opening remarks by Ambassador Henk Cor for about 15 minutes, more or less, whatever you're comfortable with, Mr. Ambassador, and then we'll start handling questions and comments. So if you have questions and comments, you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel welcome to put them in there. We are not allowing people on video or audio at all. So questions and comments will come in the Q&A, and Mina will triage those, I guess. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But we had an enormous registration list for this event. I think the registration was more than double the registrants that I note right now. It looks like about 73 online. When I looked at the list yesterday, I noticed a lot of friends and colleagues. So welcome to you all, and thank you for coming. In the as the CWC Coalition coordinator, we will also hold another couple of webinars like this before the May event. So keep a watch out for that. I know, Ambassador, you've recently come from the 102nd Executive Council meeting, which was most of last week. And I follow that fairly closely. It was quite lively, I know, and we had some interesting statements by a couple of dozen of the states parties. The last ones I read were from Syria, quite interesting. But I know there's also been the open-ended working group, the OEWG, headed by the Estonian ambassador, Lauri Kusing, who's been active in considering, what really are the goals and the results we want out of the 5th review conference. And that's been ongoing for probably 6 months or more, I think. So with that, let me just welcome you. Thank you for making time out of your very busy schedule for us. And I will turn the program over to you, and take as long or as little as you want, and then we'll move into moderated questions and answers. So I think you're clicked on audio now, so the podium is all yours, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you all, Paul and others, Mina, to join us. I think it's very important to have these talks because it will be difficult. I have no illusion on that, and I don't want to hide it. At the same time, it's quite important. In the first place, because of the fourth REFCON in 2018 did not end with a result. So I think that puts more pressure on us to have a result this time. And with a result, I mean something with a result with which the OPCW can head in the future and address its new tasks. Because that's the second point, and that is that the OPCW is at crossroads at the moment. We have had quite a number of good developments, and I am referring then to the destruction in the US, which will be finished later this year. I am referring to the new Chemtech Center, which gives us a lot of possibilities for further cooperation. In the first place for verification, but also in a wider cooperation, international cooperation. And I think international cooperation is quite important because particularly Western states need to be aware of the fact that it's important that there is something in the basket for many developing countries that are eager to become active participants in this organization. We have a large number of countries that are members of this organization, and I think there are good possibilities which we definitely should use. Another thing is the current developments worldwide, and then I am referring to CNS, which was added to the list for the OPCW, and I'm also referring to the reports on Syria. I think the last one on Duma was quite an important one. It was an excellent report, a really good job done by the IIT. But I'm also referring to cases in the UK, in Malaysia, and in the Russian Federation, where Novichok was used. And it's important to address those cases and give follow-up to that. And the last point I want to mention from the international framework is the current situation we have in the Security Council. Some of you may have followed the presentation by Fernando Arias and by Ambassador Onate in the Security Council, where there was a clear attempt to see how they could cut down sort of this report and the discussion in the Security Council. I think in the end the discussion was quite good, but what we see is that the Security Council is paralyzed because of one member using its veto more than ever. I've forgotten how many times, but it's quite a number, and it's not serious dealing with international politics. At the same time, we see that Russia is trying to use the UN as a podium for other things. We will have a presentation pretty soon this week on the abduction of children, whereby the Russians want to give what they call their side of the coin, and they use the UN for that. So there's a whole range of things that we will see. So from that perspective, I think it's important. Having said that, I think it is at the same time very important not to have this as a sort of anti-Russian discussion, but to have it as the central question: how can we strengthen the OPCW with the new challenges, the number of things I just mentioned, and with the new possibilities we have through the Chemtech Center and through other things. Now, what I see as the most important thing is that there is a balance between verification on the one hand and international cooperation on the other hand. This organization, after all, is an arms control organization, and I think that should be the central approach, so to say, the starting point for the organization. But at the same time, we should see how can we help other states by implementing the convention in the first place. Secondly, protecting their borders, and also protecting them against possible threats of chemical weapons. And there are also good developments in that field. I want to mention one thing, and that is chemical weapons and terrorism, which was chaired by the Ambassador of South Africa. I think that's a very good example where we have an initiative from one group which is really helping the organization further. So I think that is, in general, what I would highlight, and I'm open to any questions from your side. I have two other things about the setting I want to mention, and that is very good. We finally have lifted all the limitations due to Corona. And I think that's very good news, so that we will have a normal meeting where people can meet people, where we can have open discussions and other things. And we look forward to have such a meeting. With regards to the presence of NGOs, we are still in discussion with the Secretariat. What are the possibilities, and how can we enlarge the possibilities for having presentations, and particularly having presentations close to the main room? That is a discussion which is still going on. We will have next week again talk with Mr. Vasili on that. And to be frank with you, it's always a little bit difficult to get the OPCW from the pattern they have used over the last 1.5 years to a more open pattern, because for the right reasons, they're very careful, which is good. But we insist that it's very important to have a good and open exchange. Now, I would like, with your permission, Paul, to leave it there, and I'm open for any questions or other things you or other colleagues want to raise. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. So that's a very good introduction, and I think you've hit on many of the points. We have many questions coming in already. I must say, too, our audience here is quite varied from all over the world, but we have a few former ambassadors. I think we also have the former chair of the third review conference, who you know, Christophe Patore. And we have a good number of our CWC Coalition members, and we have other people too, far beyond the coalition. But let me first ask about maybe about the importance of terrorism and terrorist use of chemical weapons. You know, that's been a big discussion, and it's obviously related to the Russian assassination attempts in 2018 and 2020. It's also related to the innumerable number of, you know, alleged uses of chemical weapons in Syria by the Syrians, but also certainly here by ISIS, a handful of times anyway, if not more. And I'm wondering has this been really the working group I know on chemical potentials for chemical terrorism, has this been a major issue and will continue to be, and will there be any specific resolution, perhaps strengthening national implementation thereby, or looking more closely at trade and precursor chemicals, or other issues to try to, other than, you know, international training programs, trying to limit the availability of toxic chemicals to national and subnational groups?
Yeah, I think you mentioned quite a number of things already, because what is behind, that's a bit the drive. It was explained to me by several members of the African group, is particularly ISIS. As you know, they are very active in northern Africa, And there is a serious fear that might be something that could be used. So that is one point of it. And the other thing is protection. For us, and I think you are right there, the most important thing is implementation of the convention. Training programs can help, but the most important thing is things like border control. How can we help you to do that? How can we exchange information as different states? And having read that report, although I have to confess that's already some time ago, I think there are a number of good recommendations which we can work on. I think it's also important because it comes from the African group. The African group in general is very active at the moment in the OPCW, and it's important to continue that engagement. I very much welcome that. So that would be the approach I would say we should take, and I think it would be important to have a number of recommendations included in the REFCON conclusions.
And a related question here, which is from Ian Anthony, who you may know, asks about the options really for a final report. You know, the goal, I guess, is normally to have a final consensus document out of the conference. But he's asking here, for example, could there actually be a vote on a final report? Would that be one option? Certainly would be one option, I guess, but maybe not a likely one. Or will it just be a chairman's report? What's your best guess at this point?
It's a very good question. I would almost say it's the central question, which we are also dealing with as member states. What would be the best thing? Let me first say that my intention is absolutely to see how much we can do, and I will do the utmost to have a consensus report, because if you have a consensus report, the effect is the best. Having said that, though, it's important to realize that if we would have a very meager consensus report, for instance, if there would not be a very clear reference to Syria, I mean, what's the value of such a report? So it is for member states to decide that, but I think it's very important to see what is the bottom line. We have to see that during the process. As most of you, I'm sure, will know, there has been a UNIDIR report on the different possible outcomes of the CWC REFCON. I thought that was a good report, and I welcomed it very much because it gave the different options. Because there are a number of states who say, well, there is only one option, and that's the consensus report. I think there are indeed different possibilities, but we have to concentrate absolutely on a consensus report first, and to see how far we get. I am, for the moment at least, somewhat hopeful with regard to that, because you mentioned already, Paul, the open-ended working group. What we have seen so far is, and that's absolutely thanks to Ambassador Koosing, who has done a marvelous job, very transparent, a lot of consultations with all groups, sitting down, trying to incorporate as much as he could from the different groups. So what we have on the table now as a REFCON 2 report for the open-ended working group is quite good. So I think we have there a good basis, but the job is not finished. So we will still have some further talks, and we'll have to see how that goes and how that is balanced. In any case, I have close contact with Ambassador Koosing since I'm in the bureau, and we both do also regularly exchanges and that sort of thing. So he is working hard on it. We have to see where it goes. So for the moment, I wait that. The procedure is, as you might know, that when the open-ended working group is finished, he will send it with a letter to the chair of the REFCON. And my intention is But that depends on the member states. Again, I'm completely in their hands. But my intention is to see if we have that report to identify a number of things where we should have to concentrate on for two reasons. One, it's important. Two, there is disagreement on those points, and we have to see how far we can get in agreeing on a number of points. So that is the strategy I intend to follow. But for the time being, we have to wait for the open-ended working group, and let's see how that works.
The convention is a 5-day convention, as opposed to a 10 or 15, even 15-day, experience amongst other multilateral treaties, which makes for a very quick schedule. And I know in the last couple of CSPs, maybe partly due to COVID restrictions, we had no national statements. We had no industry or observer or NGO statements either, live from the podium. So I'm wondering, this year, will we have actually live statements for national and other speakers from the podium?
Yes, absolutely.
We will.
I had a lot of discussions with the Secretariat on that, to be frank with you, because they said, well, this is such a good practice, and we are much quicker. We can have much more time for other discussions. My approach is, and that has been supported by all regional groups, is that we absolutely need to have an open debate. I think it's important to see how we can make that debate as effective as possible. So we will have speaking time limits, 5 minutes, and what the intention is to encourage member states to make statements, short statements on their key points, and next to that, to submit eventually longer statements they want. But we think it's important to have a lively debate, and it's also important for smaller states who often don't have a lot of input on all the different agenda items, but they want to make their points come across as well. And I think it's very important that we have so many states in the convention. So we should use that, and we should give them the opportunity to make statements. So that is what we have agreed so far. And finally, I think on this basis, also the Secretariat, because it's the states which have to decide on this, the Secretariat is going along with us to do it this way. The other thing, and you mentioned that already, is the 5 days. I can only say this is terribly short, and I really would have appreciated if we would have had more time. There was a long discussion on when it was going to happen. That started off with that a number of member states said we don't want the same formula as we had in 2018, when you had first the Conference of State Parties and afterwards you had the REFCON. That was not a good experience. We fully agreed with that, but then the question is, when do you do it? And in the end, we think it's unfortunate that it's such a short period, but there was very clear agreement on those 5 days with a large group of countries. Yeah, that's what it is, and we have to work with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that one of the key issues is really holding people to 5 minutes. As we know in the past, it's been very difficult for the chairs to hold people to 5 minutes, and we've even talked about a red, yellow, green light system, or cutting them off at 5 minutes, which of course nobody will really like. For NGOs, the past experiences, we've not had live presentations for the last couple of years. I think primarily for timing, but also for COVID reasons. And we've put up written statements and also videos on the web. We've actually broadcast those in the corridors outside the World Forum plenary hall. This year, I know we've had 94 NGOs, which probably represent well over 300 individuals register for the 5-year review conference. So it's been somewhat to my surprise, it's been a really good turnout, potential turnout. And I'm sure there will be people, we know there are people who want to speak from the podium as well if they're allowed. So this would probably mean that we'd also have some limited time for NGO presentations, right?
I take up that point, and we will bring that up again. We have mentioned it before already. Next week, I promise you, and then we will come back to see what we can do there.
Yeah,
and on speaking time, as you say, it's difficult, but my intention is to have a clock. I have agreed that already, and then we see. And yeah, I hope it will work. I will do my utmost. When I chaired the MPT RevCon in 2017, and I said we will have limits to speaking time, everybody said I was totally crazy and everybody would hate me. After 2 days, I remember everybody said this was the best thing ever, because everybody liked it in the end, and it forced people to make really their key points. So I hope it will work here as well, and I will do my best for it, but I need the states to cooperate on that.
Yeah, of course. No, I think we all understand that, and maybe you should charge them each 50 euros for every extra minute over 5 or something. Something along those lines. But I think we will have a pretty good NGO turnout. The challenge for the NGO community is we have this year very little, if any, travel funds available, partly due to the end and beginning of the new EU grant to the OPSW. And so we're told by the OPSW there are no travel funds available for any NGOs. And that's really been helpful in the past to bring a lot of individuals there who, particularly from developing countries, who really can't afford just the cost of visas and travel and the rest. So we'll see what happens there, but that could also limit the number of NGOs that are actually physically there in The Hague.
Yeah. What I can do, if I may react to that?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
What I can do, with your permission, is that I raise this with a number of states and see what we can do. Because I think indeed, as you say, it is important to have an as wide representation from NGOs all over the world as possible. So I am really happy to mention this to quite a number of countries. Please do not hesitate yourself. And I will talk again about it with the Secretariat, because I do agree with you. This is fundamental, and there must be a way at least that we can enlarge the possibilities for NGOs to travel. I'll pick that up.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I appreciate that very much. I'm sure many of the NGOs will too. We have many questions coming in, spanning a wide range here. One on the schedule, though, itself, from Richard Guthrie, who you know, is how will the Dutch public holiday on the Thursday of the review conference affect the proceedings? And actually, I'm unaware that there is a holiday that week, but maybe I'm not up to snuff on Dutch holidays.
Well, it's Ascension Day. It's Ascension Day, so right. Let's hope not too many people will leave us for another place. But seriously, we have agreed that this week was the week, and that implies that we will have a full day meeting. And people who have a day off have to get compensation for another day with their governments. So we have agreed that it will be a full day, a normal working day. The only thing for the Secretariat, and that's a pity, I think, is that the costs will be very high, because they will have to pay the people in the World Forum double salary, because they are working on a day off. And that is in the Netherlands quite expensive, as you may know. So that's a pity, I think. But it is what it is. Yeah, we can't change it.
it makes me think of the annual Conference of States Parties is always the immediate week after the American Thanksgiving, 4-day Thanksgiving holiday every year. So all of us going to the Hague have to leave in the middle of our Thanksgiving holiday to get there for the CSP every year. So, you know, that's only maybe one country in the world, but that's always a difficulty too. It probably happens to any week. There'd be a holiday of some type somewhere in the world. We have a question here from a colleague on the inspectorate, and wondering, and I've written that question down for myself too. Will the size and quality, you know, capability of the inspectorate be raised? I know this is a concern as we wind down and hopefully complete this year the end of declared, you know, chemical weapons stockpile destruction. And I know the inspectorate itself, which used to be somewhere over 200 inspectors, now is down to 100 or in that range somewhere. I'm just wondering, as we go forward, we obviously need a very strong and very capable inspectorate with the ability to surge quickly for challenge inspections and the like. Has that issue been raised much in discussion so far?
Yeah, that has been raised by different countries as well as by the Secretariat. Mr. Arias himself has pointed out to that issue also quite regularly. As you say, there's a serious shortage, and it will only getting worse. That is also related to the fact that there is a maximum of 7 years. Yeah, the 10-year policy. Sorry, I couldn't find the word. The 10-year policy, yeah. Which often in practice means that if somebody is here for 5 or 6 years, they start looking around, and if they get a good offer, they disappear to somewhere else. And particularly for inspectors, it's quite important because it takes time to train them. It's very important work, as you said, which they do for the organization. So one of the things, and we have discussed that before, and I think we will have to discuss that again, is to see whether we could have a more easy tenure policy for inspectors, because it's so fundamental. So that is one issue which is to be discussed. Another issue related to that is the question of geographical distribution. That's a question that is brought up in particularly by the Latin American group. They want to see something there also in the REFCON, and it is related to this question to some extent. It's not only the case for the Latin American group, also for other regional groups. So we have already in the framework of the open-ended working group discussed this, and we will continue to do so and see if we can find certain solutions for that. And the solution should be that we get more people from those regions, but that we should maintain quality, because merit is the fundamental thing for people in the OPCW. I mean, this is very specialized work, and it's important to do that. But I personally also think, having talked to many delegations and a lot to the TS as well on this issue, we should have a closer look at it, and it's indeed on the agenda, and it's fair that some other regional groups point that out as something where we should look at and see what we can do.
Yeah, I think with that regard too, I remember a few years ago there was a comparison of the experience of the inspectorates. In other words, the seniority of the inspectors and experience, and there was quite a difference, I think, when we began to cut down the inspectorate a few years ago, particularly after the Russian completion in 2017, I think, and there was a big difference between 5 or 6 years of experience versus 1 or 2 years of experience. So that's probably a very relevant a relevant issue as well, I'm sure, regarding the inspectorate. Looking forward. We have a question here. Let's see, I'm trying to locate it here. Alexander Gionis, who you probably know, has commented that it really will, back to a consensus outcome document. He said it will really be important to have a consensus document. If RC5 does not generate a consensus strategic outcome document, this means there will not be another opportunity until 2028, the next 5-year review conference. And this means there is potentially a gap of roughly 14 years without a strong strategic document. And I'm assuming everyone is well aware of this. Ergo your response on the importance of a consensus final document. But that really is an important point to make, I think, with regard to finding consensus at the end of the meeting. Do you think?
I share that, absolutely.
Yes, okay. Jennifer Marshall has asked a question here about whether there have been any reports over the last 5 years. I think probably since, the study, the IIT report on Duma, of the use of sarin gas by states parties, not by terrorists, she says, but by states parties and perhaps private non-state actors. Have there been any such reports to the OPCW that you're aware of? I think maybe she's referring to Syria, but could be elsewhere too. I don't know.
I know there are cases with Syria that need further investigation and that are related to sarin. Mr. Onata mentioned it to me as something that needed more investigation sooner or later.
Right.
I am not, but I'm looking at my colleague, but he is Paul, but Paul is not aware either, Paul, of reports. But there might be things. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm not aware either, Ambassador, but these would probably be classified potentially anyway, unless they leak out to the news, to the media someplace. So let's see, I'm looking for another one here. When the use of CW is alleged, the CWC is reliant on states parties to request any investigation or clarification. There is no route available for alleged use to be addressed if it does not, come from states parties to raise the issue directly. Will there be any consideration given to find a means for such issues to be discussed formally and even actioned by the OPCW, the technical secretariat?
Is a very good point. This was raised in relation to the cases as in Iran, where the schoolgirls were poisoned. And there was also, according to the authorities, there was a clear link with chemical gases. And it was discussed by different state parties. But obviously, it's very difficult if Iran, one, is not willing to do it itself or putting the question on the table, and two, is not willing to work together with the organization. Now, I understand there have been a number of declarations by different states on this, but it is a sensitive issue. It's I haven't heard from states who want to bring this up. But I wouldn't be surprised if anybody does, because it is an important point.
Good, thank you. Let's move on to the Chem Tech Center. And we have some, we still have time left. I think we have about at least 20 minutes, if not more, left that we could take. We have one question that to make the Chem Tech Center successful, long-term, a stable central budget will be required. So this relates to budget, I guess, as well. Not relying only on voluntary donations that were all used to build the Chem Tech Center, as we know, with 35 or 40 million euros. As part of developing a stable budget, state parties will need to agree on the activities the new center will conduct. Could you speak about those conversations that have been happening and how you feel those conversations are going?
First of all, we absolutely do agree that they should not come from voluntary things mainly.
Yeah.
I would even say rather mainly from the central budget. At the same time, that might be difficult, but I think the good thing is that we have the Chemtech Center and it has been paid for completely by donations from different states. And I must really compliment the TS and Mr. Arias how they have done this in the sense that states have given things, but then it is for the organization to work it out. And I think that's the right order because then you cannot see a situation whereby states that have donated more would direct the activities or direct the direction of activities of the Chemtech Center. So that's a good starting point. But it's important, as you say, to have a good budget. Now, I think there we see two developments. First of all, there is the intention by many member states and by the organization as well to have training in the Chemtech Center. And there is broad understanding that that is of great value for the organization, for the implementation of the convention, but also for further developing possibilities for states to deal with possible threats, but also to deal with following up what their chemical industry is doing. And the last point is also important that we see a development over, let's say, the last 10, 15 years, whereby more and more factories that are producing chemicals are moving to developing countries, sometimes with disastrous results. And I think it's important that we will have inspections there as well, and we will follow up, and also that those states themselves will be in a position to control that and oversee that. So I think there the Chemtech Center is quite important. We should do that. I think also the Chemtech Center can have a role in educating groups of people from different countries. That could also help, for instance, what we just mentioned on geographical representation. If we would have special trainings for certain regions, I think that could help enormously. So we'll have to see how the budget develops. I think for the moment, there is a clear will to see how we can use the Chemtech Center as much as possible. And I have to say, those of you who haven't visited so far, do it, try to get an opportunity, because it is important. It is really a beautiful center. I think it's very well equipped. It has a lot of possibilities. Also for training, there are special areas for it. So we will open it officially on the 12th of May. And from then on, we hope to have a lot of activities starting.
So the 12th of May is the Friday before the review conference.
Exactly.
And will that be open, you think, to the public or to?
No, it will unfortunately be a limited event.
Invitation only event, yeah.
For member countries. But we have, and that's why I'm mentioning, we have had discussions from the Netherlands and some other countries that we said we should see to have a wider possibility that it opens to a wider public its doors to see what is there, also to underline the importance of the organization and the possibilities of the organization. So we are still discussing that with the Secretariat. But on the 12th, unfortunately, it is a limited event, which is also related to the limited space. But I mean, what you could do is later on have different groups visiting in smaller groups. So, and I believe there is an intention in the TS to make that possible.
Yeah, I know. I've had meetings actually with the DG specifically about long-term use of the Chemtech Center and using it for not just technical training, but for public outreach, media events, the like, so that in fact it encourages more inclusivity amongst industry, academics, non-governmental experts, reporters and the like. So I think it'll be a great addition, I think, to the whole, to the whole capacity of, as well as for designated laboratories, to expand the number of designated laboratories as well.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, which
Yeah.
I would strongly support, and which should also be, I hope, in the report, because there are regions that have no designated laboratory at all, and that's not a good case. I'm referring in particular to Africa, but there are other regions where it's also very thin. So I think it's important. Absolutely, I agree.
I have a question from Sven Yort, who's here in the United States. He says, my organization, the American Thoracic Society, have great concerns about the rising use of riot control agents worldwide and the limited knowledge about their health effect. OPCW's Scientific Advisory Board, the SAB, has defined conditions for the safe use of riot control agents and has recommended to remove certain agents from the not control list. Are you aware of any efforts by states parties at RC5 to revisit riot control agents as a category, implement the recommendations by the SAB, and or investigate the use and toxicity? Thank you.
I don't know from states that are working on that. I do agree that it's an issue which deserves more attention. It has been mentioned to me by one or two countries, but not as a quite important issue. But I think it's definitely an interesting one. So I would definitely encourage colleagues from NGOs to see how we could make a point that this is on the agenda as well, because it's absolutely an issue. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a gray area between use of riot control and use it as a chemical weapon. And whenever I see riots somewhere in the world, whether it's the French rioting, which is common, or whether it's the Iranian, crackdown on protests in Iran these days, I always tend to look, if you're using some sort of riot control agents or tear gas or whatever, whether it's military forces or police forces, or that's also a gray area as well. But I think obviously, in my mind, RCAs are not allowed to be used by any military forces, period. So if the military is coming in and using riot control agents to disrupt public protests, that could be potentially a violation of the CWC. Terrence Long, who you know from Canada, asks if you're aware of a Dutchman. He says Dr. Martin Molenbroek, who came in contact with mustard gas while on holiday in the Dominican Republic. And he has written to the OPCW and the Dutch government. Will it be discussed? That must be maybe a sea dumped weapon, or an old and abandoned weapon in the Dominican Republic, perhaps. I'm not aware of that, but
no, nor am I. This is totally new for me.
Okay, Martin Muhlenberg. Richard Guthrie is asking, would it be possible for NGOs to visit the Chemtech Center during the review conference? Could it be arranged for a particular time for NGOs to go together? It's a good, that's what I was thinking of when we were talking about that earlier. You could have one afternoon, one morning or one afternoon where anyone from the review conference could hop on a bus and go over to the Chemtech Center. That might be a useful opportunity for everybody, don't you think?
I can mention it to the TS.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good idea. Let me shift, Ambassador, to the U.S. destruction program. We've known, many of us have followed that very closely, including myself, from the early 1990s even. And the delays in the program, along with every other country too, particularly Russia, have been over and over and over again. So our program originally scheduled to be finished in the United States in 1994, is now looking at 2023. So we're about 30 years behind original schedule. Are you confident that it will meet its September deadline? And if it doesn't, I mean, I have no idea, at this point, nor does anyone else, I think, whether they actually will make it. But if they don't make it, I think the concern is that there could be political fallout during the review conference, particularly with national statements.
I think you're absolutely right. And I have to say personally, also having been involved before when I was head of Department for Non-Proliferation on this, I mean, if you ask me straight away, yes, in 2008, 2009, we were told that it was rapidly progressing and there was a lot of progress that has not materialized. So I think it's important that it happens this time. Otherwise, it will be very bad for the REFCON, for the reputation of the US as a main upholder of this treaty. On the other hand, I have positive signs. We have a number of colleagues from regional groups are invited to visit in June, I think, the destruction center. And we had presentations regularly by people from the Ministry of Defense, including last week at the 102 Council. And that presentation looked very good, but as we all know, you can make presentations, and Americans are particularly good at that, looking very good, without that you have all the results. So let's see. But I mean, my inclination is that there's real progress now. But let's see. The proof of the pudding is in the destruction here.
And the review conference in May is probably still a bit early to really know, I think, because if you look at the numbers at both Pueblo, Colorado, and Bluegrass, Kentucky, everything can fit within that time frame if things go well. But we've known historically, oftentimes things don't go so well, or even environmental testing, encourages the state to hold up under environmental permitting from time to time, full-time operations. So it's maybe too early. We'll know more probably in July or August rather than May, I would think, on the U.S. program. There's still, a lot of concern over the countries outstanding from the treaty: Egypt, Israel, South Sudan, North Korea, as well as Taiwan for inspection purposes. And I'm wondering if the universality issue will come up during the meeting. Probably it will come up, whether it's a major issue, I don't know. And to follow on, what more might be done to bring these countries in? What more arm twisting and in diplomatic encouragement or economic encouragement could be done?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It is on the agenda, yes, definitely, because it's important to extend the treaty as much as possible in order to be effective. At the same time, I have to say, Taiwan, I don't know, but there are some political issues there as well, as you can imagine. But for Egypt and Israel, I do not see a lot of possibilities. They are linked to each other, and Israel always referred to the chemical weapons in Syria. And I think also that if we don't have a good discussion or a good report or good reactions on Syria, it's easy for Israel to see, well, listen, guys, We always told you that Syria is the big problem. You wrote good reports about Syria, but nothing happened. So for us, there is a risk. Because I think, and I had this discussion with the Israeli um, um, government before, and I then used sometimes the argument. I said I could never see Israel using chemical weapons in view of their history. But then their answer was yes, but we have a neighbor very close to us who is threatening very much with those weapons, and whom we know, and they knew before all those reports were out very well, that Syria was having a lot of those weapons stored and producing for a long time. So that will be very difficult. I think there is indeed a linkage with Syria. Well, we all know the story from Egypt would link it to the NPT and would say, yes, in the NPT we agreed. We won't do that on CWC. So we wait for Israel. So that is a difficult one. North Korea, I'm afraid that's pretty hopeless. I mean, if we see what happened over the last 2 weeks again with testing and that sort of thing, it's really a rock state. Unbelievable what is happening there with the population, with the policies, etc., etc. So I'm sorry to say, but I'm not very hopeful on the progress.
Yeah,
But
thank
it
you.
will be on the agenda.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be on the agenda. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm looking at the time here, Ambassador. It's almost noontime in the United States. It's 5 p.m. your time and probably much later farther east. Let's just take one more question, because I know you've been very generous with your time to give a full hour here. And I have one from Alex Gionis, and it says, state party delegations and key roles in review conferences in the past have predominantly been filled with men. I believe the designated chair of the Credentials Committee is a female, but are you aware of efforts toward trying to improve the gender representation of key roles for RC5, such as the Committee of the Whole facilitators or other roles? So that's an important issue, but longer term, obviously, and much longer term than just the review conference, of course.
Yeah, but I fully agree. I mean, it is absolutely nonsense in those times that gender balance is what it is. I have to say, the TS is making quite some progress. They have a policy that is following this. I have been discussing this with the new recruiter who's there, and I can tell you that they have adapted their policies in such a way to give more opportunities for women in interviews. They have used special techniques that are used in Vienna with the UN to make it more equal in the selection. So that is going, and we have also in bodies we try to look more and more to that. I have to say it is positive in the Western group, where we have now Australia led by an ambassador and a deputy who are the chair of the WEA group, and there are other positions as well. So it is growing. Also with women ambassadors in the Netherlands. The ambassador of Nigeria was one of the best chairs we had in the EC. Very impressive. She did the host country. She's again a deputy chair. So there is some progress, but a lot to do still. So I would encourage absolutely you also to bring this up time over again. We have an initiative with quite a number of countries that is led by Canada. The Netherlands are a supporter of that. Now I'm talking with my national hat, but we hope that this is supported by more countries.
Yeah, I think my own recollection is there's been a lot of progress made by the TS too, in not just gender equity, but also geographic equity as well in the building. So I think this is still a long way to go, but I'm sure you're all my guess is you're all well aware of this and working hard to improve it. I would like to end our discussion there, Ambassador, because as I say, you've been very generous with your time. We all look forward to the review conference in May. I know everyone on board the CWC Coalition, there are several hundred of us, are very supportive of the CWC and the OPSW and all of the hard work that you, particularly representing the host country, the Netherlands, and many other ambassadors and delegations put so much effort and time in. So blood, sweat, and tears, as we say. So we wish you luck. We'll be working with you further, I'm sure, and quite willing to be as supportive and helpful as we possibly can. And with that, I think on behalf of everybody, I thank you very much. This is not the end of our discussions, I'm sure, but maybe the beginning for the next few months and longer. And I would like to turn it over now to my colleague, Mina Razai, at our Arms Control Association headquarters in Washington, D.C. to sort of close out the meeting. So thank you.
May I say one thing?
You may. Absolutely.
And that is that I highly appreciated this exchange, and I really would appreciate also during the conference, we all know there's limited time, but at the same time, do not hesitate. If we can organize something, my door is open. We have to fit it into the agenda, but I'm really interested in that because I think your points are always very valuable and are of the essence of bringing this organization further into a future fit OPCW. Thank you.
Great. We appreciate that very much, Mr. Ambassador, and we'll definitely work with you and other members too that we highly appreciate. You've also always been very receptive, so thank you very much. Mina, turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I wanted to say thank you again to Ambassador Kwast and to Paul, and also to Tony, who's working behind the scenes, and to everyone who's who tuned in, who participated. We really appreciate all of your input. So this webinar will be available on the CWC Coalition website in the next few days. We tried to get to all the questions, but if we didn't get to your question or you have another question later that you'd like to ask, please feel free to email me at cwcc@armscontrol.org. And I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. I just want to let everyone know that we're going to have another webinar in mid-April, more about the logistics of NGOs at the CWC, at the RC5 in May. So I will send out some more information about that in the next week or so. So thank you again for all of your attention and participation, and I hope everyone has a lovely evening. Thank you.